Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So it has finally happened. Ahn Cheol-soo and Yoon Seok-yeol, the two presidential candidates that were rumored for months since the start of 2022 to merge their campaigns, they've merged. And who is going to be the unified candidate? It's going to be the Conservative Party's pick, Yoon Seok-yeol, the bigger party, the People's Power Party. In this case, he overpowered Ahn, and now the two forces are joined together with just a week before the election. It happened on March 3rd, officially, and the election's on March 9th. Just days to go. But what will this mean for the actual vote split? Will all of Ahn's voters go towards Yoon Seok-yeol, or is the picture a little bit more complicated than that? We'll break it down. So last week there was another round of hubbub about this merger because last weekend, it looked like they were getting close, but then something exploded, and then Ahn decided to pull the plug and said, that's it, he's gonna go until the end. And when repeatedly asked throughout the week about the potential for a merger, because most of you might be thinking like, well, he said he's not gonna do it, so why are all these people asking? Now, this is something about the way that Korean rhetoric works that still drives me up the wall, because he said in no unclear terms that the time for unification has passed. I will go to the end as an independent candidate. And then he dropped in, and I haven't been contacted by the Yoon campaign. Now, for a non-Korean speaker, when you hear that, basically saying like, the man has made up his mind. The man has made up his mind multiple times, he said it this way, and this seems to be it. To a Korean speaker, almost every single Korean speaker and Korean would look at that and say, oh, there's still a possibility. Oh, he just basically said that there may still be a possibility of working things out. How you might, this is beyond translation. It is, oh my God. What makes Korean rhetoric so dangerous and lying so easy? Because if this is not considered a lie, then imagine what people can get away with when they are actually lying. Because we don't take people's words and what they say to be the truth and then read into what they're saying. A lot of the times it's correct what we're reading into, but sometimes that is manipulated, and you can easily create a betrayal later on by basically saying, I never said that. Didn't you hear what I said? It's all over. We're not going to merge. Not saying that Ahn is being nefarious in this case, but if you imagine how you are allowed to say whatever you want, and then people can take that interpretation how you want them to kind of take it, and then screw them later. That is such a repeated way of doing Korean business practices that drives a lot of people up the wall. And also, if you come to Korea and try to do business, that can drive you insane, because it sounds like somebody is just flip-flopping or they're lying or whatnot, and then you ask other Korean people and they will not agree with you. They'll basically be saying like, wait, when I heard it, I think he said that he was still open for negotiation. You roll back the tape again if you have it, and they'll say like, yeah, that's what that means. And you're like, how in the world is that what it's supposed to mean? So that's why I got you covered there. So it was just a couple of days ago. Apparently, Yoon and Ahn met at like midnight. They met until like 3 a.m. They hammered out the details, and it was decided that Ahn would concede to Yoon Seok-yeol, and after the election, they would merge their two parties together. It looks like maybe there was a sweetheart deal set where Ahn would have a leading position in the next government. There has been another pledge for a multi-party coalition-style government where it's not just the dominant party that's just kind of muscling their way through everything, although apparently under the Moon government they had promised that, but that didn't come into fruition. Previous governments. Essentially, you guys, it's just, again, like what I was saying about the whole wordsmith, people do not hold up to their word. And this is what I think voters are also really upset with when they call it Yeouido politics, or our version of Washington-style politics, essentially, is that people just not only... The complicated part of Korea, like I was just saying, is that like it's not as if like your word is not even good to begin with. That is the foundational crux of the problem. And then so it is so easy to betray somebody and go back on your word and ignore it and say that, oh, I think you were just misinterpreting things. And people love in Korea to say, oh, I think there was just a misunderstanding. When, honey, you know that you was manipulating that understanding to be misunderstood. So Ahn pledged that he would support the Yoon candidacy, but it remains to be seen how active he will be, because back in 2012 when he merged with Moon Jae-in, he kind of was like very lukewarm about going out there and saying like, okay, I merged my candidacy, you know, rah, 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 rah. We only have a few days left. So the big question is, where will Ahn Cheol-soo's voters go? And it is not a direct one-way bus of all of Ahn's supporters to Yoon Seok-yeol. Not at all. There's a lot of fractioning of his voters. Now, under Korean law, you're not allowed to publish polling results. I guess you can still take polls, but you're not allowed to publish them to the media. I guess they think it might affect or like unfairly influence people, so they want to kind of give everybody like 6 days before the elections, kind of like a cooling off period from all of the polling results to probably make their own decisions. And then also early voting has started. It's also a reason why they made this shotgun marriage, to make sure that, hey, if we're going to go through with this, we better merge it before the early voters start voting. Most of the polls in Korea only talked to about 1,000 people, but suspiciously there's always like 1 or 2 or 3 added, like 1,002, 1,003. I don't know. Does that sway results? It might sway results if you know statistics well. Most of the polls show that Yoon Seok-yeol and Lee Jae-myung are neck and neck, about 45-45, 42-42. Some of them even have the difference under 1%. I'm not exactly sure how much I trust it. However, now that Ahn Cheol-soo has dropped out, Shim Sang-jung, the woman, she's still there. Now that Ahn Cheol-soo has dropped out, only one poll showed that more of his supporters would go to Lee Jae-myung, and that was from Gallup and Money Today. Ahn supporters moved 26.8% to Yoon. Lee Jae-myung got 36.9%. But notice how this is not all totaling 100%. So either those are undecided or going to other candidates, where there's about like 12 candidates. There are people who are Ahn Cheol-soo supporters without Ahn Cheol-soo who are abstainers. So that's also going to be a critical voting block that might move the needle. But most of the other polling shows that the majority or more voters will go to Yoon Seok-yeol. So M-Brain showed that about 30% of Ahn supporters would go to Yoon, about 25% would go to Lee Jae-myung. And then Ipsos showed the highest difference. 45% of Ahn's supporters would go to Yoon Seok-yeol and 25% would go to Lee Jae-myung. So there was some sort of debate of how advantageous this would be to Yoon Seok-yeol. Just because you merge doesn't mean that you'll get all of his voters. You actually open up the risk that more voters will go over to your opponent, because Ahn Cheol-soo, again, is like political gold. He kind of goes both ways. And so these polls seem to indicate that the advantage does go to Yoon. There's also a symbolic advantage of him supporting Yoon Seok-yeol, so there is that component as well. But more than just people deciding who is better or the lesser of two evils at this point between Yoon Seok-yeol and Lee Jae-myung, the question that most likely seems to be moving voters at this point is whether they want a change in the government's party. So right now, the party is the Democratic Party, the Minjudang, Moon Jae-in, and then his heir apparent essentially is Lee Jae-myung of the same party. So do voters want to keep the same party in power, or do they want to switch the government? And that has been the biggest campaign pledge, I would say. Like, there's been a lot of campaign pledges developed throughout the time from, I would say, Christmas. Real last minute if you ask me. But from the beginning, and what has been consistent until now, that seems to be the strongest campaign message and promise from the conservatives is essentially change the government. If you don't like it, just change the government. And that's why we're seeing a lot of voters as well be a little bit jaded and on the sidelines and abstaining, is because I think people are really waking up to the fact is no matter what you change in the government, once it goes towards, you know, the political swamp, well, we have an island, Yeouido, it all becomes the same again. And like I said before in other videos, even these two top candidates are kind of like the rebels and mavericks and the outsiders of the political establishment within their own party. Even though they're still sort of established, they would be the least of the, you know, political royalty of each party. And so already with the choices that were presented to the public that they chose through the primaries were wanting to change the government. So changing the government on both sides is something that people want. But more than that, some people are actually saying, rather than thinking of it as changing the government, what Korean voters really want is a change in politics. They're sick of the way politics is not working for them. The way that they see it's essentially court politics. It's like we have another emperor. We have such unjust systems where you can't really do anything about it, and then it's just like when the people get in power, they just enrich themselves. I told you, it is like a couple of generations, you know, removed from probably like some of the autocratic nations that are trying to now get out of that and move towards democracy. Now, who is the real winner in all of this? Who was, I mean, especially if we're going to talk about it being palace politics, because I'm telling you that, you know, all of those Korean dramas that you see that are set in the old dynasties with like emperors hasn't left Korea, honey, has not left Korea. So who's the one like kind of in the back with like kind of a dagger, you know, in his robe? Those robes were so freaking shady, man. Like they, you know, like those robes that they used in like Imperial Korea, Imperial China with the long sleeves, like you hid everything in there. That was kind of like your backpack, even if you just had innocent things like scrolls and papers and then even knives and stuff like that. Anyhow, so who's the one with the dagger in like those big old robes? Well, Lee Jae-myung, the party leader of the People's Power Party. And remember, he had been in this civil war with Yoon Seok-yeol, not really supporting him. And really, a lot of people have been saying that he's the one that was really sabotaging this merger with the Ahn Cheol-soo camp, because when it looked like Ahn Cheol-soo would be the smart choice, when Ahn Cheol-soo was polling almost at 18% when he was at his peak, that would essentially challenge the power of Lee Jae-myung to maintain control over his party. And you know, this young guy, he's a young guy, but he's definitely a political chess master. And I think when you look at this situation, he is the one who won by brute force. If you're talking about winning Korean politics style, it is basically whoever is going to be the biggest bully behind the scenes and manipulate the game board. He even, during this whole process of the merger, said publicly that, oh, I just heard and I wanted to warn you, Mr. Ahn Cheol-soo, there's somebody within your power who is a spy and a backstabber and a betrayer. They said that they want to make sure that you go down as a candidate. Of course, you know, he didn't name names or something. It was just like making everybody go berserk. But if you're not willing to go to that level, then you're not going to win. So how do I feel about Ahn Cheol-soo and his merger? I think it was finally smart to do, because even his supporters who were his mentors in Korean politics, you always have like the old guard, like the emeritus politicians, kind of be the silent people in the back, and they all publicly went out and turned their back on Ahn Cheol-soo after supporting him, saying like, look, we supported you, but we need you to merge. If you don't merge, we're all dead. And so they turned their back on him. And I kind of feel like that, along with the other pressures, really made him change his tune and say, okay, I'll merge for the good of it. Once again, where he's not going to be in the prime position. Early on, I've always said that, you know what, Ahn, you should go to the end, be in the prime position, but with the caveat of you gotta be able to push the other ones out. And this one, I hate to say it, but like, it was all laid out for you, but I don't think he was backhanded enough, aggressive enough. Aggressive is even the most nice way of saying it, but basically, in the end, I do think Ahn Cheol-soo is the biggest winner in terms of he gets to walk out with his head held high. He has his pride intact. He has his self-value intact. He doesn't have to go down into the gutter for all of this for himself. To win in Korean politics, you have to live in the gutter. You literally have to live in the gutter with your water filter just to take sips every now and then, but you gotta be a gutter animal and be backstabbing, and any kind of advantage you can take, you're trying to destroy all of your political enemies. And so that is something that we don't see in Ahn. We haven't seen it, and I don't think we ever will see it, because that is not him. He also, if you look at his net worth compared to everybody else, I think there is some sort of softening agent with the amount of money he has. Like, I think it's either 100 or 200 million dollars net worth, and everybody else is like, maybe the richest is like 10 million and under. And so somebody like that, I think, especially with the way that he has seemingly earned his fortune in an honest and correct way, doesn't have to go down, is not used to going down to the gutter, doesn't see it as necessary. But Korean politics is what Korean politics is. You of all people know Korean people better and seen more. And so if you weren't willing, I guess, to do that, then you would have to have come up with some other countervailing force that we have never seen before that can win against a gutter knife fight. But right now, the way Korean politics is, it's still a gutter knife fight. Whoever does it the, craziest, unfortunately, wins. And in this case, it seems as if Yoon Seok-yeol won out in this merger. And now we have to see next Wednesday how the results will go. And right now, most of the other polls show that Yoon Seok-yeol is going to win beyond the margin of error. And many voters on the right are very concerned about it being a tight race, because they say if it's a tight race, they will make accusations of there being some sort of like voting fraud or vote ballot stuffing or something like that. And so we have to see if this is going to be a decisive victory to change the government or not. But what has been spoken even before early voting has been taking place is that Korean people want a change in the way politics is done in this country, and that both sides do agree on. All right, guys, what do you think? Are you excited? Are you upset that Ahn dropped out and is kind of being the bigger man about this? Or do you think he should have just stayed on and just seen where all of the dice rolled or cards were laid out? Leave your comments below. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.